So I'm about to give a session where we talk about how to use everything DiSC as a tool to do that. And the real secret sauce is to make sure that you understand yourself, that's the self-awareness piece, that you learn how to manage yourself, but most importantly that you learn how to tune into the needs of the other person. So I used a radio analogy from time to time. I'll probably use a language metaphor or even unlocking a combination to try and make sure that you're meeting the needs of the individual people on your team. Because once you do that, you're going to be much more successful at managing and developing people and bringing out the best in people. So I'm going to hone in a little bit about how the different DiSC styles tend to motivate people. What kind of environment do they create? And what do they need to do to tailor that approach to the needs of the people that they work with so that they really bring out the best in everyone on their team? Well, welcome everyone. You enjoying the conference so far?
Yes.
Good, I like that. Wonderful. Well, I'm delighted to be here. My name is Laura Davis. I'm an executive leadership coach, a leadership facilitator trainer. What we do is corporate culture change, and we use all the DiSC tools to help do that. The Everything DiSC, the 5 behaviors, and another assessment called PXT Select. So you can read about me, you know, blah, blah. But I'd like to just jump right in. So I want to ask you a question. How many of you have ever worked with a manager that was just really hard for you to get along with? Anybody? Yeah? Okay. So some of you didn't raise your hands. That's a good thing. So perhaps you're the people who are responsible for helping people who are difficult and nobody can get along with be better managers? Yes? Raise your hand. Okay. So kind of got a mix. All right. So I'm going to hearken you back to that whole experience in a bit, but I want to give you a brief overview of what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about the importance of emotional intelligence in leadership and management and why that's so critical and what's the impact on corporate culture. And then we'll also talk about everything DiSC management while I'm giving you kind of a brief primer of emotional intelligence. Most of you are familiar, but I make no assumptions, right? And hopefully we'll give you some practical takeaways that you can apply right away. All right? So here's what I'm going to have you do is I'd like for us to divide the room. It looks a little weighted over here. So how about Rose and you from that point there over here? I'm going to have you all discuss characteristics of great managers. Hopefully you've had that experience. However, I want you to really think about your experience, like reflect on it. Like don't just give me a list of what great managers should be. And you guys get the fun part, okay? You get the not so great managers, all right? So just turn to a neighbor and talk about that, and then I'm going to ask you in the large group, what was that like? Come on in.
I didn't bring it in like I thought I did.
So you guys are talking about characteristics of great managers over here.
Oh, okay.
I'm just gonna. That's what happens when you walk in. You get in the front, and they're talking about not so great managers.
This guy was more about peace and love, and so he kind of wanted to feel
And I'm happy to send you the slides. I might have to send them via Dropbox, but. All right, so we're going to keep it rolling here. So let's start with the positive, and then we'll end with the negative. Just mix it up a little bit. So what were some of the characteristics of great managers? Anybody, shout them out.
Oh, organized,
Okay,
motivational,
okay.
good listener, resourceful, empowering, optimistic, accountable, influential, ethical, advocate.
Wow, this is like a
environment of
comprehensive list.
trust, and emotional intelligence.
Ah, okay, great. That's the right answer. Okay, good. And you all were talking about great managers too. What else?
Genuinely care, active listening, great coach, know how to delegate, no second guessing, feedback, encouraging, very knowledgeable, and accountable.
Wonderful. Okay,
Yes.
comprehensive list.
Yes.
Do those people exist? How about the flip side? Not that, right? But what else did you come up with? Anybody?
Lack of self-awareness is an overarching theme.
Yes.
So with that, you get a lot of micromanaging, you get a lot of, someone takes a lot of credit and none of the blame.
Yeah, terrible.
Control freak, yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Ego-driven.
Ego-driven, yeah. So they're in it for their own purposes.
I had
Yeah.
the opposite, like so wanting everybody to get along that was just kind of
Ah.
passive, no direction, no accountability.
Okay. Equally challenging, right? Yeah, because you don't really know where you stand and you see people on the team taking advantage of that. Sure. Okay.
Is that the non-leader leader?
The non-leader leader. Yeah, there you go. So what was the common denominator? Actually, you said it over here, but what do the great managers have that the not so great ones don't? Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I love Goldman's model. There are a lot of models out there, but really it's sort of the secret sauce. You know, it's that intangible thing that really makes a difference whether or not someone is the kind of leader that you want to work with, that you want to follow. So all of that is important to understand, and I think we all get it, but not everybody does. And it's amazing to me, even if I'm on a plane and I'm talking about what I do, I'll say emotional intelligence and people go, oh, what's that? So it's kind of not in the lexicon as much as we might think. So here's a little test. Sheldon obviously is an example of not having emotional intelligence. But this is really common in corporate America, isn't it? Because so often people get promoted because they're a great individual contributor, they're great at the technical skills, but they don't have the leadership training, they don't have the leadership ability to really progress. So what do we do about it? Well, it's interesting to note that the importance of emotional intelligence goes up the more responsibility you have, the greater leadership capability you really need to have, the more emotional intelligence is an important skill, right? So this is such an important thing to keep in mind when you're designing and developing curriculum. This should be a part of what you're really focusing in on. So in general, we're talking about promoting effective working relationships through emotional intelligence. Now, what's at risk? I always like to talk about the consequences of this, and these are some stats you probably haven't heard before. This is from the Labor Department JOLT survey, and I love that acronym because it's kind of funny. It is kind of a jolting statistic. Did you realize that 3 million Americans quit their job every month? I mean, that's astounding, right? Now this is, overall, all kinds of jobs. It's not just professional jobs again, but 50% quit because of their manager. You're nodding, right? How many of you have quit a job because of a manager? Yeah, or taken another job because of a manager? Absolutely. So it's pretty astounding too. 56% think that their managers have been promoted prematurely, right? The Peter Principle. And have you ever thought that? Why is this person in this role? Sure, of course. And then 60% think their managers need more managerial training. And the managerial training, meaning, the soft skills, the emotional intelligence, how do I inspire people? How do I lead people? Hey. So it's said that employees don't leave companies, they leave managers. We all have heard that. It's an obvious statement, but even before Gallup was measuring it, good old Dale Carnegie said it. So really important to understand. So what I'd like you to do is just at your table with the person next to you, what are some things that a manager really needs to do? What are some functions that a typical manager should know how to do? Okay, so I'll just give you 2 minutes to talk about that. How are you?
Lovely, how are you?
Good.
Yeah,
Yes, good. So thank you for the clarification. So I'm going to use them interchangeably. So manager, leader. Yeah, and I'll say more about that in a second. Thanks for the catch. So let's just shout some out, right? We're just going to keep it moving. I'll go from table to table so it's not chaos. How's that? Yeah. Yeah. Right. All right, so back in the back, I'd like to hear from this table. We'll go around like this. So just shout out some things that you discovered or discussed. So share with me. Yeah, being available. Okay. Trusting. Okay, so these are personal qualities, so I like that. But what do they have to do? What are some functions?
They have to be good time managers.
Okay, they have to manage time. Good luck. What else?
They need to understand the business as, not just
Right.
the job that you're doing,
Right.
but the business.
Okay, yep, so they need to have some strategic direction. Thank you for that, yeah. What else?
You also said be able to remove roadblocks.
Uh-huh.
Open up pathways for,
Right, and what kind of roadblocks? Like political, yeah. You have politics in your organizations? Yeah. Well, amazing,
Making
yeah.
themselves accessible.
Say again?
Just making themselves accessible.
Yes, accessible, sure, absolutely.
Mentoring their team people, but also mentoring others outside of their realm.
Right, absolutely. So why do managers struggle from your perspective? I mean, it's a lot to do, right? And actually, Mallory and Ashley brought up a great point. I'm going to use leaders and managers sort of interchangeably here. We could have a whole conversation about that, right? But managers need to be leaders, and leaders also need to manage, though, don't they? Right. And so there's a lot we could, discuss around that. But why do you think people struggle? I have a very simple graphic. Right?
Not enough support.
Not enough support. Okay. Not enough training. If we harken back to that 60% of people think.
They're looking for the same thing from their leader that we're looking for from them.
Ah. Okay. Yes, culture. Yes, thank you for that. That's a great segue. So, absolutely. And as I said before, people are often good at whatever the competency is. The salesperson is the best salesperson, the engineer is the best engineer. They're excellent individual contributors. But when it comes to this whole people stuff, they don't always know what to do. And if they don't get training and support, then how can they be expected to, right? And we're all in the business of promoting that. But really important to understand the link to culture. So thank you for that, Jim. You're even in the front as a plant. But what happens in organizations is, and just as you said back here, I can't see your name. Chris said, the leader has to have strategic direction. And generally, senior leaders will have strategic objectives. They go off to their offsite and they plan that every year. And, they all cascade it down throughout the organization. Sometimes that's a problem because not everyone's been involved, but, theoretically that works. But have you ever been in an organization where those strategic objectives are revisited again and again? Yes, and why is that? Because oftentimes the culture doesn't really support it, right? And it's not that people don't have good intentions or they don't really follow through, but if the culture doesn't support it, then it falls flat, right? What do we mean by culture? Somebody just tell me what culture is. All you learning and development professionals, you should know. Norms and behaviors. Yeah, so sort of how things get done around here, right? The values, beliefs, and behaviors in an organization. And they can be very different in different parts of the organization, can't they? Years ago, I worked for Equifax. Anybody from Equifax in here? And I worked on the credit and collection side at one point in my career and on the insurance side in another. It was like working in a different company. I enjoyed the credit marketing side. Insurance was kind of, old school. This was a while ago, but, things are like that in many organizations still. But what's the biggest determinant of having a healthy culture? We've been talking about it thus far. Emotional intelligence, but, trust, yes. And who needs to be the person who is really instigating all that? The leaders, right? Yeah, absolutely. So we need emotionally intelligent leaders that balance the head and the heart. And this is Goleman's definition, but I'm going to extend it a little bit. to me, self-awareness is not only, understanding your emotions, but my strengths, my challenges, my limitations, my blind spots, and that's where DiSC is going to come in. And by the way, we're going to give you a complimentary Everything DiSC Management profile that you can take after this class. But, I also need to manage myself, right? And there was a Harvard study looking at which was easier, self-awareness or self-management. Which do you think is the case? What would your guess be? Self-awareness is easier. Yeah.
No, I think so, management.
You think management is easier? Anybody else?
Say the question again.
Sure. So which is easier, to be self-aware or to manage yourself? It's kind of a trick question. Yeah, right. Like you can't manage yourself if you're not self-aware. However, you can be self-aware and not manage yourself, right? I knew I shouldn't have eaten that extra piece of cake, or right? So just interesting little piece of data there. But yeah, managing ourselves, and then having social awareness is really understanding the other person, being able to read their language. And I'm going to share a couple of metaphors around that. But managing the relationships is really about influence and communication and productive conflict and all the things you shared with me at the outset, right? So this is the handout I just wanted to reference. I am not going to spend time on building emotional intelligence today, just in general, but these are some tips in general that we work with when we work with our clients. And we do executive coaching, we do training, et cetera, and hopefully that will be helpful for you. But I like this typology. I can see and be socially aware and self-aware, but I need to also manage myself first, and then manage my relationships. Okay? So it's about finding the right combination. And I like to use this metaphor and several others in that that different people are motivated and stressed by different things, right? And sometimes when you're a new manager, you don't know that. And I think back to my first role as a manager. I had to manage 100 people at Exxon, and this was back, well, I shouldn't say the time frame, we're taping this, back in the day. And it was interesting because I had just come out of school, but no one had ever told me that different people needed to be managed different ways. I thought there was one way to manage, and that was my way, right? And that was how I like to be managed. But instead, you want to really think about the platinum rule. And the platinum rule is not the golden rule, like do unto others as they would like to be done unto, but really think about what's important for them. What's the combination for all the different people that I'm working with? And that can be very different. So I'm going to frame our conversation about understanding and managing yourself, which is the self-awareness and self-management. The understanding others is the social awareness, and then the managing your relationships as the relationship management as we go throughout this process. And the reason I like DiSC is because it can be very observable and very behavioral in a corporate setting. There are other tools that you may use in different contexts for different purposes, but DiSC is scientifically validated. 1 million people take it a year, which is quite striking. I wish they were all my clients, but a lot of people use it, so it's a familiar tool. But I use the Wiley DiSC, and the reason I do is there are some really great tools, comparison reports and follow-up reports and things that you can pull up on your smartphone that really inculcate this shared language into the culture and get people to think about how to use this on a daily basis. Because it's fun to know about for yourself, but if you don't really know how to apply it, it's sort of useless. So does anybody remember what this is? I have one like this in my bedroom. Now, it's not that old, but yeah. You're apparently not supposed to have electronics in your bedroom as much as we all do, feng shui and other things. But at any rate, it's really thinking about tuning the dial into the needs of the other person, right? And you can think about it. It's a good metaphor. What happens when you're not really tuned to the right station? What do you get? Strain, static in the radio analogy, but in an organization you get strain, you get just this political goop, right? Yeah. Tension, did you say?
I said friction. But
friction, yeah. Resistance. People don't want to do what they're supposed to do. So, it's hard. And the reason it's hard is because human beings are really judging machines. Have you noticed that? It's true. And we want to move from judging to really valuing differences. And, you know, we got to be honest with ourselves. We're not wired to do that. We're scientifically wired to look for threats in the environment and to think about how we're different. So we're moving from, my way is the right way. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way. Sometimes you're just not aware, like, doesn't everybody think like I do? That kind of thing. To really understanding, okay, now I get why you do what you do, and DiSC is a great tool to help you decode that, but you really want to get to respecting, where I'm not making you wrong anymore. I understand that your point of view is just as valid as mine. And that's what's important, I think, about DiSC is, all styles are equally valuable. People are a combination of all the styles, but usually you have a primary and a secondary style that really is your comfort zone, your home base, if you will. That doesn't mean you don't need to stretch. And so we ultimately want to get to appreciating and really valuing differences where I'm seeking out your perspective, okay? So I'm going to share with you the ladder of inference now, and hopefully you all have a piece of paper and a pen or something, because we're going to do a little exercise in just a second. But the ladder of inference is a great tool. How many people are familiar with the ladder? Probably a lot of you, yeah? Okay. Not everybody. Okay, so this is a tool from Chris Argyris, and it's an old and good tool to really explain how we jump to conclusions and take action based on limited data. So let's have a scenario here. Something happens in objective reality, an accident, a meeting, an email, whatever. And because there are different people in the world, they're all going to select different data, right? So it's the reason why if there's an accident, 5 different people are going to see 5 different things, right? And based on your DiSC style, many times we notice different things and other people will notice something completely different. It's almost like, were you at the same meeting I was, right? Have you ever had that experience? Absolutely. So, you select data and then you make an assumption and you draw a conclusion and you take action. It happens super fast, okay? So let's say, I'm going to pick on Leanne here. Let's say I'm the team leader, you're all on my project. I call a team meeting for 9 o'clock, and she would not do this, but she comes in, saunters in, sits down, just, doesn't seem hurried or apologetic at all, and just puts her hands in front of her like this. Now, what am I probably thinking? She's in a bad mood, but she came 30 minutes late to my meeting, my very important meeting. What else am I thinking?
She doesn't care.
She doesn't care. What else?
She thinks she's more important than you.
She thinks she's more important. She does, I can tell.
So what was so important that you were late?
What was so important that you were late? What else do you think, though? She's mad at me. She's a slacker. She doesn't really, like me or think this is valuable, all that kind of thing. So what do you notice about those thoughts? You've all had them. They're very negative. Now, in Atlanta, what could be some other reasons why she's late?
Traffic.
I knew that would get the consistent answer. Yeah, but what happens a lot of time is I don't test that out. And notice I made the assumption was Leanne knew when the meeting was to begin. She deliberately didn't come on time. But then I've drawn all these conclusions about her character. And have you ever heard of the fundamental attribution error? It's a great concept. It's the whole idea that, when I am failing at something, it's something in the environment, like it's traffic. But if you failed, it's your personality defect. It's not my fault, but it's your fault kind of thing. It happens a lot. So have you ever had people remind you of somebody you really don't like?
Yep. Oh, yeah.
She's thinking of someone now, right? So this is very common. So we want to make sure that we walk back down the ladder. And you really have to ask yourself, okay, have I thought of all the data that I need to consider here? What else do I need to take into account? Somebody's background, their history, etc. What assumptions have I made here? Because I drew a conclusion so fast and then took action on it so fast that I didn't really see what was actually happening in the reality, right? So really critical to keep in mind. Yeah, so good. So we're gonna keep talking about why bother, because it's hard to not jump to conclusions, right? And it's so important to consider that, in fact, this is another interesting statistic. 31% of employees wanted more frequent communication. And of course that's going to vary by what you mean by that. Is that one-on-ones? Is that guidance around what I do for a job? But 63% felt that they didn't get enough feedback. And that's pretty astounding. And I don't know about you, but have you ever worked in an organization where people give and receive feedback really well? Yes? Tell me about it, Leanne.
Well, I've always said, I haven't been corporate in a while, but when I did, it was always in learning and development, so I had really great leaders.
Great.
Yeah, just, lots of feedback, ongoing feedback, lots of
Great.
positive feedback.
Great. That's wonderful. Because, yes.
Oh, okay. I was told how, about the sandwich method.
Uh-huh.
And how you provide positive feedback, you provide feedback that the person needs to improve on, and then, but you remind them of the positive feedback again and how you can support them. So to me, that came over well with different employees.
Yeah.
Instead of just saying, having all these negatives, and it's like,
Yeah.
I know everything I'm doing is not negative.
I think the intent of that is good. It can also be confusing. So I am not an advocate of the feedback sandwich. However, it is important to give a lot of feedback, and I like to call positive feedback reinforcing feedback. And actually there's a wonderful researcher named John Gottman. Are you all familiar with John Gottman? Yeah. And his ratio is 5-to-1. So we should be giving reinforcing feedback on a consistent basis so that when you do need to give what I call developmental feedback or, constructive criticisms, which I don't think any criticism is really constructive, then you have the trust, as you were talking about before, to really have that land, right?
So is it 5 positive for every 1 negative?
Yes, in general. But you can't obviously, well, you might, but you drive yourself crazy counting that. Right? But the idea is that we need to catch people doing something right, way back like Ken Blanchard used to say, right? And really make sure that people know specifically what they're doing well and why. So really important. And what happens when you don't have good feedback though? Yeah, you make up stories. And what happens in the environment just in general? It's toxic, yeah, and morale just goes down, right? And so talented people are leaving in droves because of this poor managerial lack of emotional intelligence kind of climate that's being pervasive in organizations. So I was going to have us do a standing exercise to get you moving around, and I'm still going to do it, although it's going to be a little challenging. So how many of you know your DiSC style for sure? Okay. Okay, no, that's like half don't. Okay, so I'm going to do it, but please be careful as we're going through this. And we're going to do it fast, okay? So here's what I'd like you to do, is you're going to force yourself to put yourself on a continuum. Do you think that you are more fast-paced and outspoken? In other words, you're more active, fast-paced, assertive, dynamic, bold, and outspoken? Or are you more thoughtful, reflective, moderate-paced, calm, methodical, careful, and cautious? All right? So I'm going to ask you to stand towards that side of the room, not in the middle, but put yourself at one end or the other, and we'll see.
You have to choose one or the other.
Choose one or the other, please.
Since I can't choose a middle.
Can't choose the middle.
Make a choice.
Make a choice. All right, so force the decision. Where do you put yourself? All right, now kind of remember who's around you, right? What I want you to do is chat for like 1 minute. Why would you put yourself here? Okay, chat for 1 minute why you would put yourself here. I'm going to force you over here, darling.
Oh, wow.
Actually, in the wrong line. As I'm reading the
Do you know your DiSC style?
I do.
She's
I
having
just don't know
trouble
if it's
deciding
changed
if she's
since I
busy over
became
there.
a manager or not.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so.
Analytical thinking question.
All right, so tell me some of the characteristics over here. Like, why did you choose this end of the spectrum?
Because we had to choose.
Ah, okay. Are you in the middle?
I'm outspoken.
I am.
You're outspoken. All right, what else? Fast paced. Okay, get her done kind of thing. All right, and just give me a couple of reasons why you chose back over here.
It's strategic.
Okay, so you're thinking before you act. Okay, what else?
I said more people oriented.
Okay, well, that's coming. Okay, okay. Interesting that you see that as more people oriented. Okay. How about you, Tim?
Evolution, when I was younger,
Uh-huh.
I would have gone
Been
quickly
over there?
but as
Do you know your
time,
DiSC style?
experience- What's that?
Do you know your DiSC style?
Now,
Okay, what you
MBTI
will.
would be extroversion, introversion.
Okay, you might be over here, but we'll see. Okay, all right, so given that, now I want you to force yourself to one end of the continuum or the other. Are you more accepting, people-focused, empathizing, and receptive, agreeable, warm, or questioning, logic-focused?
I know I'm
Oh, that's you, yes. That's you.
Now I really think I'm like right there. Because I think I should have been over there. Oh man, it's hard. It is hard, right? I belong over here.
And you're usually decisive, right?
Am I usually just like, I left my notebook in the car.
Ah!
You asking if you'd seen it. Like,
All right, look at I got more people-oriented people. Okay, that's not surprising in a learning and development world. So briefly, why would you put yourself here? Just talk to your neighbors, talk to your folks. Why would you put yourself here? Like, what's the behavior that you do? How would we see that?
It's actually
There
trained.
isn't logic there.
really?
Trained and reinforced and there.
What was that
Or
in industry?
Objective, skeptical.
Okay.
Was that industry specific?
But also to understand to know how it can assist you.
Right. Just growing up as a child. And it's only been recently that I'm like, no.
Well, see, that's my father, and I went the opposite.
Nature and nurture.
Ah, okay. So let me ask the smaller group, why would you put yourself here? Like, what is a behavior that demonstrates that?
I think it was questioning and logic focused for my life.
Okay, okay. So that's the way you roll. You're questioning your logic.
What's the purpose of us doing?
Okay, you're analyzing. I can see. Can you see that? I can see that. Yeah. And how about over here? Why would you put yourself in this camp?
Individualized approach to trainings.
Okay, more customized, more about the people.
Customer-centric.
Okay. Yeah. Harmony.
It's more emotions rather than, I guess, not necessarily facts, but.
Okay. Okay.
I was going to say the process is really important to me, not just the results. But I've noticed that sometimes when people are results oriented, the ends justifies the means, and I don't flow like that.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Okay, brilliant. So if you don't know your DiSC style, you're going to get a card, and Diane's going to hand them out in just a second so you can take it, and you'll have 10 days to take it. And it's a nice gift because it's worth about $108, somewhere in that neighborhood. But yeah, no, the other ones, the ones in the packet. I've changed my mind. We're going to give them now. So if you found yourself over here in the fast-paced and outspoken and questioning and skeptical, you're probably a D, right? So kind of over here. If in fact you were more accepting and warm and fast-paced and outspoken, you're an I. Yes? Okay, right? So it's a nice way to build the room. If you are more accepting and warm, but cautious and reflective, I got some of those here. Your S's. Is that what you know you are? Okay, great. And last but not least, the questioning and skeptical, but cautious and reflective are back here, right? Very good. Is that you? Okay, see how that works? All right, have a seat. Have a seat. Thank you for playing with me in this small room. Yeah, good. So you'll see on the back of that card there's an access card. And just a reminder, if you would sign in on the sign-in sheets, then I'll send you the handouts and the invite to the webinar and some cool stuff. Yeah? Okay. Yes. She's coming. She's coming. Good. And we can also hand out the interaction guides. So for those of you who are familiar, you know this, but it's a good reminder. And so for some of you who aren't familiar with the Wiley disc, it's a circular model. It's a circumplex. It used to be a graph back in the day, but now it's a circular model. And the priorities shape the management experience. And the priorities are different for different applications. So there's a management, there's a sales, there's a productive conflict now, et cetera. And in this case, I'm going to use an example of someone who's an S. So their dot would be in the S quadrant here. But you can see my S's are often, reliable. They're focused on support and collaboration. Is that you, Tonette?
Yes.
Is that how you say it?
Yes.
Okay, Tonette, that's her, right? But speaking of feedback, sometimes if you're an S manager, you might have challenges with giving people critical feedback. Yes, do you? Okay, so challenging would be hard for you. But really what you want to do is stretch into the appropriate priority given the needs of the situation and the needs of the other person, right? And that's what the webinar is going to be about next week too. So September 4th, 12:30, I'll send you the invisible drain on your corporate culture. So, that's really critical in relationships to be able to stretch. But to be able to stretch, we need to really be self-aware, right? And we need to manage ourselves. And we need to balance our communication and not just overuse our strengths in situations that they're not helpful in, right? So I'll give you a very simple example. It's kind of a funny story. I have 3 older sisters, and my one sister lives in Austria. She married an Austrian. It was a great place to visit. We still do. But back in, the early 80s, I think it was, my mother and father were still alive, and we would go visit, and we would go to the little town where she lives, and we'd eat at a restaurant. And of course, my mother, God bless her, has lived, traveled and lived, in fact, all over the world, and just never got used to the fact that some people didn't speak English. So she would order, I'd like a steak, and I'd like a baked potato and a salad. And of course, they don't understand her. The waiter at the guest house looks at her like she's got 2 heads. And so what does she do? What's the metaphor?
Speak louder.
Yes.
Right. Right. I'd like a steak, please, right? And it's funny, we see people do that, but we do that in terms of our behavioral style too. So if you're a high D and you're very direct and you're very determined and you're very get her done yesterday under stress, you get more that way sometimes, right? I'm looking at Rose because she knows this very well. If you're a high I, you get more emotional, tell more stories, get more expressive. If you're an S, you slow down step by step. Let's make sure everybody's happy. And if you're a C, you get really picky about the details. And that's the exact wrong thing to do. What you want to do is, who is this person in front of me? And really speak to them in their language. And also, what does the situation require? You probably all know that I'm a high I, and sometimes I got to tone it down, right? And really make sure that I'm thinking through things, or I'm following up on the details, or giving precise instructions and all those sorts of things. So these are some tips for you to apply right away to be more emotionally intelligent. Balance your communication, but also convey the why. And actually, Chris, you were a great plant back there too. You have to have a vision, and you have to explain that to people so they can rally towards that and be focused on the same thing. And then you also have to model the culture, right? Be that example, and that engenders trust. And if you don't do that, you really cannot have people really be bought in. They might comply, but they're not going to really be with you. And we've all seen that, right? So good. All right, so back to the radio analogy, what we want to just do is tune into the different frequencies of the people that work with us. And it's really quite astounding. While there's 4 basic disc tiles, there's 12, and then depending on where your dot is, and if you have extra priorities, there's a lot of nuances and a lot of shades to it and a lot more depth with a relatively simple tool that is very accessible and easy for people to understand. Yeah? So, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's underneath DiSC. Now, in the management profile, there's a lot of information. There's how you like to direct and delegate people. There's a lot of information about how you manage time and what you like as a manager, what you don't like, what motivates you and stresses you. But I'm going to hone in on motivation, right? And this is the old carrot and stick. and extrinsic motivation, you remember this from Psychology 101, basically is just external forces. And companies still try and do that, don't they? And they try and do it because it works to a certain extent. It works short term, and it works for relatively simple tasks, for more routine kind of roles. But for the leadership and management capabilities and capacities that we're talking about, it really doesn't work for the long term. So I'm going to introduce you to a theory of intrinsic motivation real quick, and there's a lot of them. I love Daniel Pink, but this is not his. This is a guy named Edward DiSC, I think, D-E-C-I. It's self-determination theory. Anybody study that ever? Yeah, so you can Google it, but at any rate, autonomy is a really important thing. People want to feel like they have some control over how they work and how they get things done, and that makes sense. And this is why so many command and control leadership styles don't really work in today's world, because people want to have choice. Right? You at least have the perception of choice. So that's really critical. The other one is competence. So people need to feel like they're effective at their jobs. Remember that 60% of managers, employees thought their managers needed more training. So if you're not competent at being a people manager, you're probably going to avoid it, right? Somebody said accessible was so important. Well, maybe they're hiding in their office for a reason. But it's important to be competent. And the last one is relatedness, right? We want to care about people at work. We want to be cared for at work. You don't have to be best friends, but have that sense of connection and relatedness, right? So really important to understand. So the profile actually walks you through all this. So again, I'm focusing on one piece of the profile, and you'll see it'll cover a whole lot of other stuff. But what it does that I think is so powerful is it looks at the kind of environment you create as a leader, right? And do you do that in an effective way? Are you aware that different people on your team might need a completely different environment? And that's why you're not getting the best from them that you could get if you really were able to adapt your style. So it walks you through how you tend to create an environment. For example, this person is an I. They're very optimistic, they're enthusiastic, but again, they might have some challenges. You mentioned, Leanne, somebody being overly harmonious, maybe an S, perhaps avoiding conflict. They might not really give the feedback that they need to give in my previous example, okay? And similarly, it will also tell you how you can help each of the styles. So there's a page for each of the styles to really adapt your behavior so you're creating a motivating environment for that person, that particular individual, but also how should you reward or recognize them, right? And not everyone likes to be rewarded and recognized the same way. How many of you are S's and C's? Raise your hand again, you think? Kind of, sort of? Okay, yeah. So do you like public praise, recognition? Kind of, sort of? Not bad when it comes. Okay, that's not very enthusiastic. You can clap and tell me how great I am all day long, right? My fellow eyes, we like to hear positive, there you go, positive words of affirmation and that kind of thing is really important. So the other thing that this section will tell you is how you tend to develop others. And Ashley was saying, interactive, personalized learning, et cetera, before. Sometimes that's useful, sometimes it's not. Depends on what the task is or what you're trying to train on, and also the needs of that person. So it'll walk you through the advantages of your approach and the disadvantages of your approach, right? And that's gold, because so often if we're trying to develop somebody and we're not understanding why the methods we're using are not working, this can really give you some insight. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. All right, so good. And the other thing it will look at is, based on your style and based on the style of the people on your team, what's their area of greatest potential. And this is pretty spot on too. So in this case, this person's an I, you know, they're willing to accept new ideas. They like to network. They like to connect and rally people around an idea, et cetera. Is that true for the I's in the room? Yeah? So it's pretty spot on. So if you're trying to figure out what's a good way to really help someone progress, this can be a useful tool. Okay? So really, again, that's our framework, is understanding ourselves, managing ourselves, understanding others, and then really managing our relationships for the best possible environment and the best possible leadership capability and ability that you can get from your people. So I'd like to open it up for some questions and any examples that you might have. I think we're a little early, which is awesome. So what questions do you have?
Have you found that people's Everything DiSC workplace profile is different than their Everything DiSC management profile?
Yes. So the question was, there are different versions of DiSC, right? You can take the workplace, the management, there's a sales, there's a worker leaders, et cetera. It should not be significantly different. So sometimes it will shift a little bit. For those of you who don't know, and as a reminder for those of you who have maybe taken DiSC a long time ago, it's actually just like Myers-Briggs, you are who you are. It really does not change over time. However, people will often say what Tim said there earlier is, you know, over time, and I think I heard you say this, Chris, too, the environment or, you know, how I was raised might cause me to move in one direction more than the other, but I'm really who I am at the core. But what the real skill is trying to adapt to the needs of the situation and the other person. What I do as a quick tip is, you know, you can bring in the person's results from the workplace into the management, and I tend to do that. The theory is it can change like 12 degrees, but it generally doesn't change a lot, and to me that just helps people be clear and not have a lot of noise in the environment. Why did my dot move all over? Well, you know, so it's a one way to get out of that. Yeah, yeah. Do you use DiSC now in your organization? Yeah. And who do you work with?
I'm actually in higher ed. I'm at Valdosta State University. I'm originally from this area, but I'm down there now.
Great. Very good. Okay. What other comments do you have? How are you developing the emotional intelligence of your leaders in your organization? I'm curious. Crickets means you're not, or what does it mean?
Well, we have two tracks. One is the management track. We have this cohort leadership academy, and then we have an emerging leaders track.
Great.
Lessons
and you're with whom?
Goodwill of North Georgia.
Oh, great.
Mm-hmm. And we are at our core, we used Thomas Kilman work, which, you know, conflict styles. Because I'm an avoider, accommodator, which fits, right?
Fits with the S,
but
yeah.
I will use competing when I really need to, when I look at, I had to make that adjustment that you mentioned, which is to say if it's something that's really important and we're having that coaching opportunity conversation, that I can speak to it, but I still try to be kind.
Okay.
That's
yeah.
the I.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have a couple of quotes up here too, and you know, it's really compelling oftentimes what a difference it makes to train people. So good on you that you're doing that, right? But to get people to really apply it, well, that's where the rubber hits the road. And I will mention that there is a productive conflict version of DiSC, which is really good. It came out a year or so ago. Are you familiar with that, Ashley? The productive conflict? Yeah. Have you used it?
No, we haven't used it yet.
Yeah. So what it's looking at is your automatic thoughts, and it's really speaking to that ladder of inference where many times we're not even aware of how we react, and we react so quickly, and the different belief systems that we have, and that's really what the webinar is about as well, because what you're thinking, Tanette, is, well, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and what I'm thinking is, wait, I'm not being heard here. I want to express my opinion. The C is thinking, oh my God, this is not accurate. It's just not right. We've got to fix it. And the D's like, can we get on done with this already, right? And that's just kind of a made-up Reader's Digest version of what happens. But what's cool about the Everything DiSC suite is there's now a tool called myeverythingdisc.com, which allows you to pull the profile up on your phone, your smartphone, and do comparison reports. And that's really helpful because if I have a conflict with you, or if I'm starting a project with you, or I want to learn how to leverage your capabilities, we can sit down and walk through that comparison report. And I'm looking at Rose because Rose is one of my clients with Pond, big architectural engineering construction firm, and you've used that a lot, yeah? Yeah, and she's also going through another program called the 5 Behaviors, which looks at team development and so forth, yeah. So how else are you using emotional intelligence? Are you doing training? Are you doing coaching? What are some of the things you're up to back in the back? Any thoughts about that? Are you using emotional intelligence as a framework in your organization? I'm just looking at you because you caught my eye, but
No, I mean, but Myers-Briggs is more the language that
Uh-huh.
they're using, so
Yeah.
we get a lot of requests to bring, whether it's DiSC or Myers-Briggs,
Yeah.
or there's Pace Palette,
Yeah.
there's Berkman, that's in our, in some.
what organization are you with?
State Farm Insurance.
Oh, yeah.
Companies,
Yeah.
So, but in emotional intelligence, and then, anyways, I guess one of the things that we've recently talked about with EI is psychological safety.
Yes.
And creating a safe environment
Yes.
as a leader to be able to allow people to engage. And
Absolutely.
I think that ladder of inference probably plays in that space. as well.
Definitely, yeah. Well, what's fascinating about that, and I mentioned the 5 Behaviors is based on Pat Lencioni's The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. It's called the 5 Behaviors of a Cohesive Team, so it's the positive aspect of it. And DiSC is integrated throughout the model, and the most important foundation is trust, which we alluded to before, and really creating an environment where there is psychological safety. And probably some of you are familiar with the Google research that was done and that came out a couple years ago, Project Aristotle, where Google spent $10 million on trying to figure out what the secret sauce is. Why do some teams get together and really become cohesive and high performing, and why don't others? And they looked at things like, people, do they have to like each other? Do they have to socialize together? Do they have to be similar? Do they have to be different? And it was interesting, none of that really mattered. But the two things that mattered was psychological safety. Is it safe to be who I am and to really be real and authentic? And in our program, we call it vulnerability-based trust. I feel safe to say, hey, I made a mistake, or I'm in a little over my head here. I need your help on this. That kind of transparency, which you don't see very often. And you remember how people wanted so much more feedback and communication, but they don't want just any kind of communication. They want it to be authentic and real, right? That's critical. The other thing was having an equal voice, making sure that, in a meeting or on a project, everybody more or less felt safe to speak up. And I often will use the example of the Challenger accident. Some of you probably weren't even alive at the time. But one of the reasons why that happened, and the Columbia accident happened not that much longer, 17 years later, was because people didn't feel safe enough to speak up. They did not have the emotional intelligence to create that kind of environment. NASA said that they did. NASA said, oh yeah, we want to hear from everybody. We want to really make sure that no matter what your level in the organization is, you feel, that you can express a concern. Well, that was not really the case, and these tragic accidents happened as a result. So, yeah. So good. Well, I don't want to stand between you and lunch, so I want to thank you again. And just a reminder, a couple of things. Thank you for signing in. I'll send you the handouts. I'll send you the invite to the webinar next week. It's at 12:30 Eastern. The Invisible Drain on Your Corporate Culture. It's being held by the Director of Research at Wiley. He does a fabulous job. I was in a preview yesterday, and I'll follow up with you about that. And then make sure you all got the access code card that you can take your own profile, yeah? And thank you so much for being here, and enjoy the rest of the conference. You're welcome. So thanks for watching this session. I've just recapped some of the things that the Everything DiSC Management Profile can help you do when you're wanting to manage and motivate and develop your people. And the key to it, again, is really making sure that you understand the needs of the person in front of you and the needs of the situation. And I framed it in terms of emotional intelligence. You need to be aware of how you normally do things, but manage that so that you can adapt to whatever you really need to stretch into in order to be most effective to bring out the best in your leaders and the people on your team. So thanks for watching. If you'd like to learn more, please go to our website, which is lauraadavis.com, or feel free to email me, laura@lauraadavis.com, and you can find us on Twitter @CoachLad, and we have on the website all of the social media. So please follow us, connect with us, let us know your reactions and your questions, and we'll support you in whatever way we can. Thank you.